Welcome to episode six of the Welcome to episode six of the DWRD Net stationery feed. Today on the show we have Nic Pasquale, owner of Pins by Pasquale. Nick, welcome and thanks for taking some time to talk today.
Hey, Derek, thanks so much for
What?
having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. Having someone local who's also a well-established pin maker is great. We see each other when we meet up at Butler Stationery for weekly coffee and stuff, so it's always great to be able to have expand that conversation to a larger viewership. But why don't you start just introduce yourself, give a brief overview of Pins by Pasquale, kind of what you do, and then we'll get into those kind of entry questions that I've been asking all the guests, and then we'll get into the heavy hitter of Pins by Pasquale as a whole.
Sure, awesome. So, for those that don't know me, my name's Nick, or some people call me Nicholas by my full government name. If you want to call me my government name, Nicholas. Nicholas Pasquale, Pins by Pasquale. Um, Local to Nashville, little bit about 45 minutes south of Nashville, in a little town called Columbia. Have a little shop out of my house, a little room in my basement. So, get to kind of work through the winter, get to work through the summer. Um, But yeah, that's me.
Okay. So let's get started with these kind of general questions. First, what got you into pins and stationery hobby, and how long ago was that ballpark?
Yeah. So, um, let's see here. I get the years mixed up sometimes. But it was, I believe, 2018 or 2019 when I sort of became interested in making pins. It kind of started with the kit pins. But I got into it because I was into like high-end pocket knives, Benchmade, Spyderco's, Microtex. I thought that was really cool. The little pocket squares, little EDC pocket squares that people that had a cool fabrics. I thought that was neat. The only thing I was missing was a cool pin. So you started looking into cool pins, some of the machined pins, um, ball points, roller ball, stuff like that. I was very drawn to that in the beginning. Um, but looking at the price points, I'm like, oh, those are 150 or 250 or $450 a piece. It'll just be cheaper to make my own. So one year for Christmas, I asked for a little mini Win lathe from Amazon. Has a little plastic knob that you turn on the tailstock. It's inexpensive to get into the hobby as you can get. Um, and then I dropped $500 on pin blanks, probably close to $1,000 on pin kits. And then very soon it was way more expensive to make my own pins than it would have been to buy the couple that I originally
Isn't,
wanted to buy.
isn't that how
Um,
it goes? You think, oh, this is going to save money. And then until you get into it and you realize, man, this would have been much cheaper to buy something.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, but it's been so much fun these last couple years.
Did you self teach yourself, or did you go to a class, or how did you kind of learn that initial kit pin phase?
So, I got into kit pins. Originally thinking I wanted to get into woodworking as a whole. Like I was like, okay, cool, I'll get a lathe. I eventually got, a big table saw. I got a planer. I got all this stuff to do pins, cutting boards, bowls, goblets, you name it. But then the pins really took off for me. I was really enjoying it. They really they really just kind of drew me in. And what you can do originally with a kit pen is, you've got, 2.5, 3 inches at most to work with to kind of showcase a cool blank or a cool way to layer different materials together. Um, yeah, it's been a very interesting ride. Never satisfied. So um, wanted to do more than pins and then ended up selling everything and diving just down the rabbit hole of only pins. Um,
No, I
yeah,
mean, if you think a lot of people, when you get into a hobby, a hobby like pen making or woodworking is so vast. You have to find that niche or that specialization. And then once you do, you're like, okay,
exactly.
this is the subset of the whole that I want to focus on. And, that can take a bit. I know when I get into hobby
Yep.
all in and, having that focus at the beginning can also be terrible because then you're like hyper focused on the one thing instead of a general focus. But so
Yeah.
In terms of pens, what do you have inked right now? What have you been writing with lately?
Great question. So I typically keep, 10 to 12 pens inked and ready to go at any given time. Some of the ones I reach for the most recently are, uh, it's a pen I made, but it's a nib that a friend of mine did for me. Um, this is the Hooligan number 8 nib, and Tim Cullen hand engraved my logo into the nib, and it has a blade grind from Mark Bacchus, one of my favorite pens right now. Another one that I really enjoy is this one, another one that I made. It's got a clear green acrylic along with the primary manipulation one cap and grip section. And then it has the Monty Winfield. I guess I don't know if it's Vario or Vario. I never know how to pronounce it correctly. But it's a steel flex nib, writes very wet. I love it. And then I have a couple factory pens inked up. Um, I always gravitate towards the Pilot Estimate 23. This is the amber
Classic.
with the gold trim. Love it. Amazing. I got a broad nib and then I sent it to Mark Bacchus for an architect grind. So it's got a crisp architect from Mark Bacchus, which is probably one of my favorite grinds, if not my favorite grind.
No, that's great. So with pens, since you keep 10 or so inked up, what are you putting in them?
hmm
What's your ink preference? Are you do you stick with the same inks all the time, or do you experiment? Do you get samples? Do you have your, this pen is always going to have this ink? How do you approach inks?
So you'd mentioned diving down the rabbit hole and also trying to just get everything and have everything. That was my initial approach. Um, to inks. I thought I'm going to get all the diamines or diamines. I'm going to get all of, you name it. I wanted to try to get them all. But I really lean pretty heavily on the Pilot Iroshizuku series. I think at this point I'm only missing 3 or 4 of their main series of inks. And whenever I try to see them, I try to grab them when I can, but I haven't found one yet. I'm trying to get their limited edition release inks, like the 75th anniversary inks. I just love the way that they perform. I love the way they look on paper. The Pilot Iroshizuku series is definitely my go-to um, line of inks.
No, I'm very similar. I have a variety of inks. I think I'm around 125, 126 these days. And of that, if I look at my pens that have ink in them, most of them have a Roshizuku of a variety of colors. That's just, it's a great performer. And the bottles are some of the coolest looking bottles. Maybe next to the Ackerman bottles. Ackerman is still going to win
hmm
for me. But so
Yep.
the big three, paper. What are your paper preferences? Are you an MD? Do you do like a traveler system? Do you kind of go with whatever? What are you writing on?
So for me, I'm not so much a journaler. I'm not so much like a note taker where I keep like a book of notes. Um, I have one system for writing down my blade recipes. So I use a Maru Nimazine
Yeah,
Nimazine paper.
Armand.
I don't know which exact one it is, but it has a really nice like title section up top. It's got lines, so it makes it nice for me to break things down. Other than that, I like the Tomo River paper. I'm currently toying around with cutting it up to make my own Tomo tear off notepad. And then I love the bank paper, the Life bank paper. It's kind of my number one go-to paper right now because I like to be able to write on it, tear the sheet off, and then move on to the next thing. And I kind of sort of have another file system set up where I'll stack those up if I need to go back and refer to some notes.
So now that we know bank paper is being discontinued, have you started the search for what's going to be its replacement?
Hmm, I haven't, and that's something I don't stockpile. Is I do not stockpile paper. I probably should. With as affordable as a lot of the paper is, there's not really an excuse to not stockpile paper. When you consider that the Iroshizuku bottles are $25 a piece, and a nice notebook might be $15 a piece, uh, there's not really an excuse to not have multiples of the notepads that I really enjoy. So I haven't currently been looking around yet. Paper does last me a good bit, but I have not started exploring other options for when the bank paper does run out for me.
Well, and we're a little bit spoiled having two stationery stores in the greater
Yep,
Nashville area that,
yep,
one of the things where we can actually go put hands on and touch it versus blindly trying off online ordering. So we're a little bit spoiled that way. But I recently picked up my
exactly.
first. After that, I found out, oh, it's being discontinued. I was like, well, great, of
Lovely,
course.
lovely.
So my last kind of standard question, one of my favorite questions to ask because everybody answers it a completely different way. What's your favorite stationary adjacent item? And what I mean by that, a bag, a lap desk, a book weight, a case. What is your favorite
Hmm.
item, pen, paper, or ink, that ties in so heavily with the pens and stationery hobby that you use?
That's a great question. Um, I do really enjoy leather goods. That's something I never got into before fountain pens. At the Atlanta Pen Show, I picked up this Galen leather 12 pen sleeve, and the it's got that removable insert. So leather goods are something I've recently got into. I've tried my hand at making some leather pen sleeves. I think leather and fountain pens, especially higher end fountain pens, they both just go hand in hand. Whether it's a case, it's a sleeve, could be a pen rest, it could be a bag, could be a wallet, could be a purse. Uh, I really think high end leather goods, along with nice high end fountain pens, definitely go hand in hand for me personally.
No, that makes sense. I actually kind of started doing leather stuff when I got into pens because I wanted a pen
Hmm.
sleeve. So, I happen to own an industrial sewing machine, so I'm able to sew covers and kind of fallen out of it, but I still have some of the ones I made over a decade ago that are in great condition because
Yeah,
quality care for it. It's gonna last. It's gonna outlast us all.
yeah,
So that kind of answered those kind of general questions that I've been asking everybody. Let's get into the important part. Pins by Pasquale. So you kind of already touched on the first question I had of what made you decide to start making pins. So as you've gone through that process of starting with kits and getting into, you know, acrylics and things like that, just kind of talk about how that progression came to be, going from the kit pin into the, blank hoarding, into the kind of talk about how you approached that journey and when did you know it was time to break away from the kit pins and start going, full three piece and then full, custom design pins after that?
sure. So it kind of, I guess the beginning of the end for kit pins came when I got bored with, when I say bored, I try to use that term loosely, strictly because they're still striking pins. They're still totally gorgeous, but the abalone material from Jason Robinson, where he'll take a physical sheet and turn it into a blank that a maker could use for a kit pin. Um, and then he makes it so easy on the makers where literally all you have to do is put the bushings in the brass tube, put it on the lathe, and turn it down, and that's it. That's all the work you have to do. Um, After that, those pins, the price point of those pins started allowing me to save up for and start slowly purchasing the tooling for kitless or custom or bespoke, whatever term you want to use for a three-piece fountain pen where you're making the cap, the grip section, and the body or barrel of the pen. I started off by reaching out to another local guy after I had gone to his house for a pen maker's meet and saw how one pen was made. He set me up with Jim Hines, and Jim Hines was able to slowly help me get into this. Um, Sent me a list of tooling, basic dimensions, the tenon cutter that he created, the taps, the dies, the whole 9 yards. Um, but then I didn't have the kitless blanks. All I had was the basic wood blanks from Woodcraft or acrylic or the polyester blanks that are really just meant for kit or component pens. So then I had to start trying to find the custom and kitless blanks. And that got really serious for me in 2022, February of 2022, more specifically, uh, when Jonathan Brooks did the big drop on his website that had the pastel PM, all the PM blanks he did. I believe my initial order with him was about $800. It got me a lot of blanks, got me started, and I was all in after that. Um, I have a habit of when I see a material that I want, and if there's a limited amount of it, I buy all of it. It may not be the healthiest way to approach it, but if there's a material I know that's going to be discontinued or a colorway or a pattern I really enjoy, um, and it might be a while before it's available again, I will absolutely scoop all of it up.
Oh, and that's a perfect segue into my next question because, if you really like a material, the next question is what got you into making your own blanks? So it seems like there's probably a good carryover there because then
Mhm.
you have all the material or you have the recipe where I really love this material. I don't have to worry about it going out of stock anymore because I can make
Yep.
more. So is that kind of what drove you into the blank making portion of your business?
Yeah, so there's a couple of great, I say a couple, there's a lot of fantastic material and blank makers out there. It would take me forever to name all of my favorites. But when you go and you purchase a custom material from someone, typically there's a minimum and typically there's a weight. If I have an idea for a material in my head, now I have the ability to cast it. In 3 hours, I pull it out of the pressure pot. Now I'm heat curing all of my blanks. So the next morning, I have the potential to pull it out of the mold, put it on the lathe, and then turn it the next day. That was one of the big things that really made me get into casting and pouring some of my own materials. Um, you don't have to go all in and get, the big pressure pots and all the micas from all the different companies and all the dyes from all the different companies and then a heat cure it. You don't have to do that. You can start small. But I have a hard time starting small. I kind of just go in with both feet whenever I know I want to try to do something.
No, and that makes sense. And I'd never actually thought about that, just the lead time on materials. That makes perfect
Mhm.
sense of you make the initial investment and then if you can make your own blanks, you know, I've got time to make some pins today. I don't have any material,
Yep.
that that factor makes more sense than I would ever thought. Cutting down on the, ever since 2020, we all know everything takes longer.
Yep.
And especially for small makers because they might be waiting on their materials coming in to pour the blanks that you ordered and whatnot. So,
Hmm.
a good way to approach that to kind of cut down and let you continue to make your pins when
Hmm.
you get a chance to experiment because you could try a small batch of what would happen if I did this, and it might turn out. Let me ask that: how many blanks have you tried that just turned into, they ended up on the fire pit in the backyard versus ended up as a pin?
Yeah. That's a great question. A lot. A lot. I actually have an entire filing cabinet, the wide filing cabinet with the long drawers, the deep drawers. I have one cabinet that is full. I mean, full to the brim with with those blanks. If I had to guess, it might be in between 300 and 400. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but it's a lot. It's absolutely a lot because it's not just, oh, I don't like the colors. It's the swirl didn't happen, or I didn't clear the lines in my air compressor, so there was moisture in the pressure pot while it was curing, and then the blanks turned to like a white kind of hazy color. Could be I let them sit out too long. I didn't put the resin in the tubes fast enough, so now there's an air bubble. There's so many variables that go into uh, a material I wouldn't really want to put there or have someone else turn and then come back to me and say, "Hey, dude, what's this?" Inevitably, it's going to happen because I can't see through certain opaque materials. But I stand behind my blanks. I stand behind my pens 100%. Um, if I can't fix it or replace it, I'll refund it.
No, and that's great. Great way to approach that. And that makes me think of another question that I didn't even have on. I'm going to throw
Hmm.
a one out of the pins because I saw the pin on this last Friday, and you were showing a picture of different ebonites
Hmm.
and arts like, and then once you start turning it, how different it can be. How does
Yep.
that? As you're picturing a pin, you have the blank, and then you turn it down some, and it's completely different than what you imagined. Do you like that, or is that something where it you kind of have that look in your head of I want it to look exactly? Does that become just a different pin that you still have to keep trying to make to finish that idea?
Sure. I feel like that's something that over time, learning different materials, for example, really the best example is going to be Primary Manipulation 1 from Jonathan Brooks. The material is always gorgeous. Um, but a lot of times the outside of the blank does or material does not represent what's on the inside of the material. So what you're seeing on the outside of the blank is where the resin is sticking to the outside of the tube as it's going down. And really, where the cool stuff happens is 1.5 to 2 millimeters down in. Um, so as soon as you shave off a little bit of that outside diameter, that's when you can really see the colors on the inside. I know there are a lot of makers that will face or take a little bit of that outside diameter off of the pins before they show it to someone to say, hey, this is what the pin is probably going to look like or look closer to. Um, but when there's as many blanks as I have, it's it's a little bit hard. So you kind of just have to hope for the best sometimes. And when you're pairing materials too, you're kind of pairing. Um, you might be pairing a solid color with one material that's like a heavy blue. So you might pick a solid blue or a clear blue that's going to try to match or contrast with that. Um, yeah, that's a great question. It's very difficult, and the approach is typically different every single time, just based on what it is. If it's an acrylic, if it's an ebonite, if it's a hand poured resin, um, there's a lot of different ways to approach that.
So since you just mentioned the big three materials, do you have a
Mhm.
preference? Do you prefer ebonite? Do you prefer acrylic? Do you prefer resin? What's your preference?
So if I could turn one thing forever with an unlimited supply, it would be celluloid. Um, a lot of the celluloids are difficult to find. Um, they're difficult to buy in large quantities. Um, I feel like they're pretty easy to work with. You have to have some caution, but I feel like the way that they feel in your hand, the way that they even smell whenever you write with them, that's something that's super appealing to me. Ebonite is absolutely, in my opinion, the easiest to work with. It threads gorgeously. It takes a nice polish. Um, Ease of use, definitely Ebonite, but if I had to pick one, just unlimited supply would absolutely be celluloid.
No, that's interesting because with that being harder to get, and it does require a little bit more caution, just from my
Hmm.
understanding of pen making as a whole. I know eventually I'm going to end up down that rabbit hole where I'm going to end up in your
Hmm.
shop. Hey, show me how to do this. But I'm
Yep.
trying myself because I know how my brain works. Um, you know, Now, do you have any celluloids in your collection of blanks that you're just waiting to turn? You're afraid to touch it, even though you're a well-established pen maker who makes beautiful pens. Do you have any of those materials that are just like, not yet? You're just waiting, for a little bit longer until you've had more time on. You're making, like I said, you're making beautiful pens already.
Thank
But
you.
I know from some of my hobbies, there's like that. It's like the white whale. You're waiting for that.
Hmm.
You don't want to risk ruining a hard to find precious material.
Hmm.
Do you have anything like that in your blank collection?
Oh man, I can't wait for you to come out because we're gonna do a deep dive into that when you come out, and that could be an entire video in and of itself. So a couple of things I do. I say this as humbly as I could possibly say it, but one of the things I do pride myself on is finding a lot of the hard to find materials. And I've really worked over the last year to try to connect myself to the people, the other makers, the other collectors, or potentially the other manufacturers that would have a stock of certain materials. I also have a hard time wanting to make a lot of pens out of the same material. The one exception being the tortoise celluloid. That's probably my all-time favorite looking material. I've got a pretty decent stock of that, but some of the things that are, I don't want to say impossible to find, but they're definitely like not in great supply. Things like this, the Delta, I think it's the Delta Marma Incronato celluloid. It's kind of a deep red brown and then has this off-white, almost yellow. Um, One of the other makers called it the giraffe blank. So the giraffe blank. Scott Lewis picked this up for me at the Washington D.C. Pen Show, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to say how much I paid for this. I paid less for a Mont Blanc 149 than I paid for
Whew.
this type of material. So things like that. Another fun one. John Greco at GW Pens helped me source this. This is, I think it's called Blue Ice. It's called a Sebloplast material from a manufacturer called Mazzucchelli. Not sure on the exact pronunciation of that, but it's a gorgeous blue. Has black lines that flow through it, and then the chatoyance of the blue is also just gorgeous. So materials like that are absolutely things that I try to buy as soon as I can whenever they pop up.
No, that's I like that approach. Where you're looking for the hard to find.
Mhm.
You can still make pins out of other stuff, but if you have the choice, you want the hard to find, the rare. Because I could see where if you're making a lot of pins, it would get kind of like you said earlier, reserving the word boring. It's
Mhm.
not that bad materials or bad pins. It's just you're doing the same thing. You're not seeing something
Yeah.
different. You're getting result. I can see where that you'd need that variety thrown in. So in
Yeah.
terms of said when you kind of got started, you went to a pen makers meetup, and I know
Mhm.
you have hosted some of those yourself. And
Mhm.
whenever I come out and do a video of making a pen, we're going to
Oh,
try and get that
absolutely.
hosting one. So talk about now how you're carrying that forward. You attended a makers meetup, and now you're
Mhm.
hosting them. How did that come to be? Was that just because you liked what you learned at the one you went to? Just kind of talk about your meetups and how that started.
Sure. So the first meet I went to was at a maker named John David Jones's house. He has Signature Pen Company on Instagram. Went to his house. He has a metal lathe set up and he has a wood lathe set up. He has a very large bench, very well organized shop. I learned from him a lot of things. I learned how to set up my shop. I learned some workflow things from him. The first time I went to his house, not sure the year, not sure the date, but there was probably 30 makers there. Two of which, maybe three, were the customer or kitless pin makers. The rest were all kit pin guys. So everybody showing off their wood pins, the single barrel with the press components. So getting to see that custom pin process was very cool to me. As a new guy that has never seen that before, being able to look forward one day to, oh, I'm going to be able to do that, or I'm going to be able to show someone else how to do that was pretty cool. At the end of the day, whenever I left John David Jones's house, he sent me home with a big giant black and yellow tote full to the brim of materials and kits, supplies. So that's what we do. We get together whenever we can. A couple of makers, sometimes some collectors come out. We'll meet up. We'll meet up here at my shop at my house, and we'll just hang out in the shop. We'll make some stuff. Sometimes I'll do a demo. Might do like an internal polishing demo. Might do a demo on threading on the lathe. Most of the meets are small now, typically 4 to 5 people. I'd love to have one where there's maybe 10 or 15 people out. Um, have you and Joe and Jonathan Butler come out, maybe even have a little table where they bring some stationery supplies and set up for everybody to just kind of go through. The small local meets I feel are really cool. And also too, Nashville's sort of a hub. So there could be people from Huntsville, there could be people from Kentucky, there could be people from, one of the Carolinas that might want to make the drive and come spend a full day in the shop hanging out with pen people, learning the process of how blanks are poured, how pens are made. Um, feel like that's something really cool to be able to do and be a part of. So I try to organize those as much as I can.
No, that's very cool, and I look forward to whenever we get that scheduled because that's
Hmm.
I'm very intrigued. Now, something related to that, I saw this actually on Instagram that your wife is an artist, and you
Hmm.
walked her through making a pin recently.
Hmm.
Was that a cool experience for you, where were you just teaching her? Had she ever turned a pin at all, or was that her first one?
So she's been down here and she's seen some of the process before. I take videos of a lot of stuff, so I'll just show her what's going on because I'll either be turning pins while she's upstairs doing watercolor, or maybe she's at work whenever I'm turning pins. But one night we were like, hey, why don't we kind of have like a little mini date night and go through the whole process of turning a pin? So she went and picked out a material. Button Candy Factory from Stormwind's Blanks was the name of the blank. It's a super bright yellow, a neon pink, and a very bright blue with bits of clear. Gorgeous, gorgeous material. So we went through the whole process of taking a raw material, cutting it up, drilling it, cutting your tenons, cutting your threads, sanding, polishing, and internal polishing. We spent, it was probably close to 4 hours making her pin, but she got to see the whole process start to finish of raw material to finished pin.
No, that was really cool because I actually follow. I'll give a plug too because what is it? Happy Cactus Studios. Some
Yep.
really cool water paintings and whatnot. So I'll put that link in the description as well.
Hmm.
It's a watercolor because I'm starting to go down that path too, teaching myself basic painting. But it's cool to see
Yep.
people who are at it already, and then
Yep.
just the pen. So recently you went to Atlanta Pen Show
Mhm.
as an, but do you have plans in the future to be a vendor at any of the shows, specifically the closer ones like Little Rock or Atlanta or anything like that?
Hmm. I would love to. I'm really aiming to try to do Atlanta next year. I wanted to do this year, but I was very kind of bogged down with commissions, collaborations, stuff like that. I enjoy those so much. But I'm still working on finding a healthy balance for myself where I can work through those at a reasonable time. And last year I absolutely overloaded myself. So I'm still currently working on catching up, working on past orders, working on collaborations from months ago. Um, Once I can wrap everything up, what I've started doing, I've kind of sort of cut off my new commissions. So all I'm trying to do is process my backlog of materials right now, um, backlog of orders rather. And in between some of those, I'll do some inventory pins. I'll do some for fun pins. I'll do some. I've recently started doing a top shelf theme on my website, which is where I really push myself on one pin. And usually those pins are, upwards of 10 to 15 hours, sometimes 20 hours a piece. I've done two at this point so far, one for myself, and then one sold on the website. So once I'm able to process all of those, then I'll start thinking about a show, working on, maybe 30 to 50 pins, different themes. I would love to do a show, but I don't have a set date on when I'll be able to do one. As soon as my backlog of commissions and collaborations is done, I'm absolutely going to work on batching out inventory for a show.
So I'm going to shuffle questions around a little bit.
Hmm.
Let's talk about some of the collaborations that you've done. The ones I've seen, I know you did for Aziza with Gourmet Pins. You've done some nib holders, I believe, in the past with Joe from Gentleman Stationer. So talk about
Yep.
some of the you've done. And, I know that you had mentioned in the past that you are going to kind of switch focus once you've kind of wrapped up. But talk about the
Hmm.
ones done because that was a cool way as a new maker to take, to get commissions and collaborations with some well
Hmm.
established. How did that come to be? What was your first collaboration?
So I believe my first collaboration was actually with Aziza. It was with a pocket pen I did called the Gnome. It takes a Jin Hao 159 nib. My idea originally for that pen was very unserious. It was not I'm going to make a pocket pen that really works. It was, hey, I'm going to take the goofiest big number 8 nib and shove it on the tiniest pen. It's going to be an eyedropper pen. And I wanted it to be really affordable, which I'm finding I really did underprice that pen. I was selling those for $120 a piece, including internal polishing, which was very, very affordable for a custom made pen with as much time as I had in each one of those. I poured some materials for her. We did a few batches of gnomes. We did the cosmic collision pens. There may be something fun in the works right now. I did the Amarillo, I apologize, pen out of his colors. I bought his rickshaw bag and thought the colors were really cool, so I poured a pen or I poured a material to match it. Made myself a pen. He reached out and he said, "Hey, can you do some of those for me?" So we did 15 of my Poseidon model, which has a slight taper, colorful finials. I did a collaboration with Joe over there, Gentleman Stationer, out of a material called Yamabudo Blast. It is a kind of magenta, uh, have some brighter magentas and some deeper magentas along with the white to highlight it. I talked with Jonathan Brooks. He did a custom pour for me based on his Arctic Blast material, which is a blue, a very deep blue that with some highlights and some shadows. My favorite ink was Yamabudo at the time, so I thought it would be cool to have a material that matched Yamabudo perfectly with the highlights and the shadows that Yamabudo had. Jonathan Brooks knocked that out of the park for me, and I did some nib holders for Joe out of that material.
Oh, very cool. So, that takes me, let's change pace a little bit. So, one thing you've mentioned, and I know that you're known for, is internal polishing. That's one of your specialties from everything I've heard. But what is your favorite part of making pins? Do you like the experimenting of making a new design? Or do you like, recently I think you made your first clip. Do you like that kind of playing around? Or, is it seeing the finished product? Talk about some of your favorite parts of making pins and then touch on the end, kind of follow up with just how you got into becoming so well known for your polishing, the internal polishing specifically, because that's, like you said, it's a time intensive and it's a specialty thing that not everybody
Sure.
does. You know, that is one thing I've heard from multiple people who don't know that I know you. Oh, internal polishing is crazy. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, thank you. So if I had my choice of only doing one thing for the rest of my pen making journey, it would be just making weird, crazy, one-off, not going to be done again shapes or designs or material combinations. That's something I do really enjoy is just going to my material bins. I'll open them up. I might be opening my Brooks drawer and I find a cool PM material. I'm like, oh, this has some cool colors. Um, and then, I might turn a little bit of it down or now I might say make a grip section and see the colors that are in the grip section and know, okay, the cap's going to be close to this. Let me pick out a cool body material. And that's how we ended up with this one. There were a lot of greens. So I did a clear green material to go with the cap and the grip section on this pen. Recently, I say recently, several months ago, I started learning how to thread on the lathe. So doing multi-start cap threads, quad start cap threads, single start grip section threads. Just using the lathe to thread has been a fun experience. Granted, the time investment is pretty significant, but it's cool to know once the pen is finished, hey, I poured the material, I cut the threads. The only thing I didn't make would be the filling system and the nib. Um, Internal polishing does allow you to take advantage of a lot of other materials. Um, a lot of clear materials. I don't want to speak out of line here, but I feel like could potentially be avoided because someone doesn't want to take the time to polish the inside of the pen. I have nothing against that, but I do love to see things come to their full potential. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to learn how to do internal polishing. The thing that really kind of set me off, I personally feel like the first pen I did that I felt really excited about that was internal polished was a neon ribbon pen. So the whole material was clear, and then it had this little ribbon that twisted throughout the entire blank, had neon colors. I made one, and Aziza at Gourmet Pens had reached out to me. She purchased it. She posted about it. And then after that, I got several requests for more, so I had to buy more material. Um, and that is sort of, I feel like, what set me off on the internal polishing route. After that, I got a lot of requests. I got a lot of commissions for clear pens, the ribbon pens, storm winds, a lot of her materials. They've got, they've got clear windows. I did not personally make this pen. This is a pen from Luke. I'm just using this pen to showcase the clear, clear windows in the material itself. So if you don't polish the inside of it, you're not going to be able to see through it. And a lot of the clear bits and materials I feel like can absolutely be taken advantage of with internal polishing. So that's what I did. I just had sore fingers until I got it right.
So something you said made me think of another question. So Aziza bought one of your pins and posted, and she's well known. She has been for what, over a decade easily at this
Sure.
point. Is that kind of how you started to build your name from that referrals from repeat customers? Do you have people who consistently be like, "Oh, Nick made a new pin. It's on. I got to go buy that." Do you have a lot of
So,
repeat? How a lot of your new business came to be? Because it was only recently that you launched your website, and I'll pop
yeah.
that up here. Nick's website, because that's something. When I met him at our local pin club, I was like, "Oh, do you have a website?" No, it's Instagram now. It'll be a website eventually. So, kind of talk through how that came to be with you know, with doing business for a couple of years through Instagram. I
hmm
mean, how did that came to be? And obviously, it was worked out well for you to have larger collaborations and be
Sure.
able to do scale you've been doing it.
Sure. So the website kind of sort of came to be. It was a long time running for the website. I've been wanting to get it set up for probably closer to 2 years before I actually broke down, took the time, got my photos together, set up my account, had to fully legitimize the business, keeping track of, material costs, nib costs, converters, shipping, everything like that, all manually over the last several years. Now the website will allow me to just say, I can punch in how much things cost. I can punch what it is to sell. So the website really has been a saving grace for me when it comes to um, allowing me to sell my products. It also allows me to post my entire inventory rather than someone reaching out on Instagram saying, "Hey, I love your work. What do you have available?" Now I'm able to send them a link directly to the website. So that's something that I've been able to really enjoy doing recently. On the website, you'll be able to find pins that I have. You'll be able to find materials. Actually, today, right after this, I'm getting ready to cast some materials so that way I can work on getting my materials built back up. I sold quite a bit just as an attendee in Atlanta, walking around introducing myself to people I didn't know, and they asked about blanks. I had some in the car. So I went to get them and brought them in, and I sold pretty much everything that I had. So I'm going to be working on uploading some more material to the website pretty soon. Um, But back to the initial point was dealing with Instagram. Instagram makes it great to communicate, especially now that you can kind of flag and mark people like as customers through Instagram DMs. 2 years ago, that wasn't the case. It was, oh, so and so wants a pin. I've got to go write it down. This is the date they requested a pin. This is the approximate date I said it was going to be ready. it it really was too much, and over the last 2 years it's probably been a little bit unrealistic for myself. I've probably done some people a disservice, unfortunately, making them wait as long as I did. So now the website allows me to be able to say, hey, this is what's available currently. um, Being on, the discords, being on Slack, being on Instagram, having an email. What I've tried to do is just funnel people directly to Instagram over the last several years. Now that the website's there, it's just very easy to say pinsbypasquale.com. That's what's available currently. So
No, that's great because you know a website for the pins. It's kind of like for all intents and purposes, a virtual pin show. You can go
sure.
up because I know recently when I bought my pin from Magnolia, I'm looking at
hmm
all And I look down, I see the one. I was like, no, that's it. That,
Yep.
I've said this before in an episode. I could hand you a pin. You might be, that is the ugliest material I've ever seen. And then the next person is going to be like, that is the best material. Take my money.
That's it.
It's everything is unique to each person. So you referenced Discord, and I want to take that into a little bit different direction, just to the pin maker community.
Sure.
It's maker community is really supportive of other makers.
Hmm.
There's not keeping or anything like that, and you kind of self police. So kind of talk about your experience when you started being a new maker and how you kind of got in with people like Sean Newton or Brooks, people who've
Sure.
been some of the original bespoke pin makers that kind of laid the groundwork for what it's become. Kind of talk about that community because that I'm sure ties in heavily with your maker meetups and things like that.
Sure. So a big thing for me personally was I tried to learn to walk before I ran, and I think in the maker community that's pretty important. Um, it's hard to want to immediately give all the nitty-gritty secrets of making a pen um, to someone right off the bat. Now, if they're saying, "Hey, I want to learn how to do XYZ," 99% of the makers are going to be more than helpful. I can't even list the amount of makers that I've said, "Hey, I've tried this, this, and this. Could you help me with getting X result?" They're very happy to do that. I'm very happy to do that. There are some trade secrets that are just sort of going to be protected. How to um, do one little process, how to add a certain component to a pen, how to, respect, I have to respect those people when they say, "Hey, I'm not really willing to share XYZ." Get it, got it, good, good with me. Um, but I don't feel like that's generally the case. I don't feel like a new maker or someone who's interested in wanting to learn the process is going to come into a community of makers and be met with everybody with their arms crossed saying, "Mm-mm, you don't get to come past and you don't get to be a part of the cool kids club." I feel like people are generally very, very helpful, whether it be with pouring materials, whether it be with making pins, whether it be with finding the correct size drill bit for the tap, or cutting the correct size tenon for the die to cut the proper threads that aren't going to have wiggle. I feel like that's something, if somebody reached out to me on Instagram saying, "Hey, I'm making a pin with a 13 millimeter cap thread and I'm struggling to do XYZ and make it smooth and make it seal properly," I'm happy to walk through that process with someone. If someone wants to learn how to internal polish a pin, I am happy to walk you through that process. All it takes is a DM on Instagram. Um, I feel like most people again are willing to be helpful. Um, and some people that are probably unwilling to be helpful, I would say there might be a reason for that. So,
No, now you were talking about as easy as a message. Now that you have your website, I
mhm.
noticed that you have a section on there. Do you plan on eventually, as time, once you kind of have some of your established commitments wrapped up, doing some kind of basic overviews on, in your blog section? Are you going to add some little snippets there of kind of showing through the basics? Because I think a lot of people, I know when I put the video about the pin I got from you and asked if people would be interested in, seeing a pin being made, there was a great
Mhm.
response to. So is that something you think you might add in? Just kind of, once again, not giving out trade secrets per se, but at a
Oh,
high,
absolutely.
because that, how many years did the show How Things Are Made on Discovery? You
Hmm.
can sit there and watch that. You're like, I never knew that I needed to know how a propeller on a submarine was made, but I'm going to sit here for 30 minutes. Is that
That's
something
right.
in the future?
Yeah. So what I'm trying to do, number one, is learn how to write a blog, write a blog that someone would want to spend time listening to me just randomly type stuff out. Um, so finding out how to write a blog is something I'm wanting to learn how to do. Talk a little bit about some basic processes and why certain things are done a certain way, or more specifically, why I do certain things certain ways. And then also what I'd like to do is start a small YouTube channel with links on the blog to it. where it might be a 2 or 3 minute long video talking through why I cut my tenons a certain way, or when I make my pins, why the threads, when I am personally in my shop, why the threads are so tight. So I basically make the threads very tight at first, and then I'll take lacquering and polishing compounds and I work it. So hopefully there's no wiggle, hopefully, or as minimal wiggle as possible. So, walking through different little processes and why I do things a certain way. Um, Certain things were taught to me, certain things I did learn on my own. And I don't necessarily want to give away secrets that were given to me from someone else, but things that I kind of learned on my own. I absolutely would love to talk about that, whether it be a blog or whether it be a link to a video, maybe on YouTube or on Instagram.
No, and that makes me think of another question related to making, you know, in any hobby or anything, any job you take, you're going to learn from the person who's training you. So
Hmm.
have you taken that and gone to a different maker? What's your approach? Do you go in and say, assume I know nothing and watch how they do it so you can get your own takeaways? Or, because I know that's something I like to do if I'm starting something new. Even if I have a basic understanding, I want to go in and say, assume I know nothing. Assume the wall over there about this. Start, at remedial. Because I have a feeling, say you have somebody who's been working a lathe for years, there's probably stuff related to a pin that has to be done in a different or unique way in order to do it.
Right.
Think because that if you don't do it this way at the beginning, that when you get down to the final step, you're not going to be able to do the last thing. So how do you approach that? Because you go and visit other makers. I think
Mhm.
down or when you were making your clip, weren't you down at Hooligan? You
Yep.
know, new skills. So how do you approach that when you're meeting up for the first time in person with other makers and you're kind of talking shop with other makers?
Sure. So the first shop I believe I went to go visit was Jim Hines. I went to go visit Jim Hines and got to see his shop. So he does a lot of collaborations. He does a lot of pin shows. He has to make a lot of pins. Now, all of his pins are made manually, no CNC. So I got to see how to process large batches on a metal lathe by hand, like not a CNC, not a machine that's going to help assist you make a part while you could potentially be taking a couple minutes to work on something else. I got to see that side. And then that was very cool. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how to speed things up, how to focus more on one aspect of a pin or a part to help streamline some of the processes. And I also got to go to Tim Cullen's house in Georgia, and I got to see the process and learn how to the other side of the spectrum make a one-off pin and focusing on one part at a time, one thread at a time, one drill bit at a time, the whole 9 yards, going from not just taking a material, cutting it into three pieces, and then, cutting your threads, your tenons, your yada yada yada, taking a piece of Damascus steel and then cutting it, and then, eventually ending up with a Damascus steel pocket clip with a little silver rivet to hold. I mean, I would not know how to do a lot of the things that I'm doing now if it weren't for people like Jim Hines, Tim Cullen, Sean Newton. Uh, Jason Miller was the initial inspiration for me wanting to learn how to do internal polishing. So if it weren't for other people willing to share, willing to open up their shop for me to be able to come in and learn, I'd probably still just be making basic three-piece pins and be stuck and not know how to do it. Um, so other people have absolutely helped me get to where I am currently, especially allowing me into their shops to see things firsthand and touch the lathes and touch the parts and see how things fit together. So that's been huge for me.
How important has working with other makers been so that you're buying the right equipment initially and not buying twice? Because I know that's a big buy once, cry once, and I'm
Sure.
sure put the money into a lathe. do I need a wood lathe? Do I need a metal lathe? A specialized tool set so that you're not buying four versions of it. You might be spending a little bit more on the front end. Talk
Sure.
briefly about how important that's been for you as you were setting up a shop to do something that's, not your day job, but it's a legitimate business of, and a hobby and business made into one. Kind of talk about how
Sure.
that.
So the first lathe I got, it was a lathe for Christmas. It was a tiny Wen, Wen is how you spell the brand. You could buy the lathe on Amazon. They shipped it to you in a box. I think the lathe weighed like 50 pounds, which when we're talking about lathes, that's extremely light. Um, a nice wood lathe is always, I think, necessary in a pen maker shop, whether you're doing organic shaping, you're doing sanding, you're doing polishing, you're using it as a buffing station. A nice wood lathe is going to be something that you want to have. You don't have to spend $1,000 on it. Um, but a metal lathe moving forward, whether it's cutting straight and flat, whether it's facing, whether it's drilling, you definitely want to focus on the right tools. Especially for me, that's something, you mentioned buy once, cry once. That's absolutely a theme for my shop right now is buy once, cry once. Um, I bought a metal lathe. It was the first metal lathe I found on Facebook Marketplace. It was an Atlas from the 1940s. Did not have a gearbox. The forward reverse didn't work on it. The only thing it could do was turn apart, and you could move the carriage back and forth and in and out. That's it. That's all it was good for. I say recently, it's been several months or a year ago. I purchased a lathe from Tim Cullen because he upgraded his lathe, and it allows me to cut threads. So it has a gearbox installed on the lathe. So I've got different knobs and levers I can move and turn, and that allows me to engage a lead screw, and it will cut a specific thread on the lathe. Um, Now, granted, something like that is going to be substantially more expensive than a lathe that's just going to have a carriage and you're just going to be able to turn and face parts. I definitely would recommend to anybody that's wanting to get into this hobby and do it right. Um, Find a local maker, find someone local to you, reach out to them, ask them, hey, whether it's a long car ride in a hotel room, whether it's a flight in a hotel room, I think that would absolutely be worth it for anybody who's wanting to see, find a maker, ask them through Instagram, maybe it's an email or contacting them on their website. If they're local to you, maybe try to reach out and see if they'd be willing to have you over for a couple hours at their shop and maybe see their process a little bit. That's something I wish I would have done a little bit sooner.
Yeah, I could see where, the idea of making a pin, because, from someone on the outside, oh, look, these pins can be sold at a premium.
Hmm.
But the reality is, you're going to have to make a lot of crappy pins before you make pins that
Hmm.
can be sold at premium. And it might be the idea is more appealing than the actual work and investment into making pins. So it might be kind of
Sure.
I had an experience, I made a pin, I'm
Hmm.
good. This is not the hobby for me. So that is
Yeah.
definitely great to, kind of go see the process before you start buying things.
Hmm.
Uh, Before you get into it. So, one other question, then we'll start to wrap up because I know my pen that I got from you is actually a matte material.
Hmm.
How often do you do matte finishes versus polished? And I ask that because for me, of my last three pens that I've bought, my TriStar
Hmm.
Studio, it's a matte finish. The pen from you is a matte finish. So for me, that is appealing. But is that a
Sure.
common thing of pins that you're making, or do most of your customers, do they prefer the polished? You don't see any sign of a tool mark, or do they like the matte
Sure.
finish? Of your overall pins you've sold up to this point? What are the preferences of your general customer base?
Sure. So I don't know an exact statistic, but it definitely feels like maybe one in every 20 pins would be a matte finished pin. So many of the pens are either clear or they have different mica powders in them, so they're shiny. Um, feel like most materials need to be polished. The particular one you have was a material I picked up from Jonathan Brooks at the 2023 Atlanta Pin Show. I don't know that there's any mica powders in that one, but I definitely felt like, oh, this one's going to look really cool left, kind of flat, that matte, kind of stealthy look. I think personally, matte finish pins feel great in the hand as well. Um, I'd like to make more matte finish pens, but that's one of those things with a lot of the materials I currently have on hand. I think polished fits more the materials that I personally have in my shop than, you know,
So the one more question, and then we're gonna wrap up because this is a good follow up to what you just said. So you get a new material, you find the
Mhm.
blank. Are you buying certain materials with one of your certain pen models in mind? Like when you pick it up, you're like, oh, that's going to be a Cerberus. Oh, that's going to be a Pasquale. Oh, that's going to be.
Sure.
How are you purchasing with that? Or are you purchasing because it's a cool looking material and you have the potential that it could become anything? Or are you kind of are you at the point where you purchase this blank knowing it's going to become this pin model?
That's a great question. It depends on, I guess now that I'm focusing more on saving for and finding the rare materials. A lot of times resin blanks are the standard is typically 8.5 inches, and that's enough for me to get a full body grip section and finial out of. So most resin blanks, I can get any model I want out of my current lineup of models out of one stick of, a maker resin material. Now, something like this, a material I showcased earlier, this is not enough to get a full three-piece pin out of. This might be enough for a body and a finial, very similar to this pin. This is the pink and the blue Mazzucchelli. Now, in a case like this material more than likely is going to end up of a similar theme to this one, where the grip section and the cap are black, and then you have the Mazzucchelli material as the body, and then the little accent finial. So as far as materials, basing a model off of a material that I'm like, oh, I'm going to make this, this, and this out of that material. 9 times out of 10, that's not the case unless it's a shorter or a rare material.
So that gives me one final follow up because your top shelf pin that you had on your website,
Hmm.
I saw where you were showing us at our coffee meet
Hmm.
where the threads didn't go as planned and you had to end up adding
Yep.
in that clear purple. And I think that really set that pin off and made it look even better. So, what kind of happy accidents, aside from that one, have you run into that really can change? You have the rare celluloid material, you're
Sure.
picturing something goes wrong because that's bound to happen with different materials, but then you
Hmm.
turning into something even better. Like that purple and that white together, just like but when you had the pin, you're like, oh, there's threads. I have to cut them off and do something else.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that because that was a perfect example. Because obviously it was beloved because it was on your website, what, a week
Sure.
old,
Sure.
and in a premium. But obviously it was, I was not the only one to go, that's cool looking. It's just not the time where I can, pick up something like that. But just kind of talk.
Right.
You're working on something, you've got a rare material, you're head in, and something goes
Hmm.
wrong. Pivot to end up with something that might be even better than you imagined at the start.
Sure. So that pen, it was ivory celluloid and kind of a purple lilac acrylic. The standard for my threads. I try to cut the threads and polish the threads in a way where it feels I would want to own this, or this doesn't feel annoying to cap and uncap. That pen did not meet that criteria. So I had to face off the threads, and then I made a little ink window, and I made a uh, new new body thread, so that way it would thread onto the cap fully. And I love the way that it turned out. I'm actually very excited and very happy with the way that that pen turned out. Um, some other ones, if a body ever doesn't turn out the way I want it to, being able to internal polish, I can always throw on, say, a clear cap or I can always throw on a clear body. And 9 times out of 10, if it's a material that's going to be hard to match, doing a clear, in my opinion, is going to be the answer. Um, so having the skill set to do multiple different things has absolutely been able to help me out whenever I do have an accident. If it's a material I don't have more of, or if it's a primary manipulation one material where it's very heavy on greens or it's very heavy on oranges, I'm not going to be able to find another one to match it. So you got to do a clear body, or you got to do a black body, or a white, or you might find a solid yellow. Um, Also, being an absolute fiend like myself and having pounds and pounds and pounds of resin from different people in acrylic, and you'll see it when you come over. It's a lot. It's a lot.
So to wrap up, what's next for Pins by Pasquale?
Um, what's next? Definitely more of the top shelf pins. I've got some materials that I haven't posted photos of. A couple new little techniques that I've been toying around with and learning. Um, I might have posted some teasers to my Instagram story. That's typically what I do if I'm ever experimenting with something. It's a great way to engage and see, okay, am I going to post this for sale, or am I going to post this as a story and see if people react or respond to the story? If this is a good idea to try or continue or even publicly show. So I think I may have teased a few things on the story as far as materials and techniques, and I've got some fun stuff coming up.
It's great to hear to see new stuff because Instagram being so visually driven, it's
Hmm.
amazing. You know, because I can imagine the anticipation of someone's, especially if you had someone to commission a pin from you, and you're posting, "Oh, look at this pin I'm working on today." Everybody else is like, "Oh, that's a cool pin," and the person who's waiting for is like, "Oh, that's my pin."
Hmm.
Tell everybody where they can find you online. Obviously, pinsbypasquale.com, your Instagram. Are there any other ways that any other parts of the internet that you frequent or wanted to shout out? Obviously we'll put links to the different makers and things that you've mentioned throughout the episode in
Sure.
the notes. But just kind of talk about, where people can find you, how they can get in contact if they want to look into getting one of your pins aside from one person or things like that.
Hmm. So I'm mostly active as far as social media goes. I'm mostly active on Instagram. Just shoot me an Instagram DM. I'm Pins by Pasquale on Instagram. My website is pinsbypasquale.com, or if you just Google Pasquale pins, pins by Pasquale, whatever, it'll pull you to my Instagram and my website. I'm on a couple different Discords. I'm on a couple different other social media pages. I'm on the Pin Addict Slack as well. If you want to find me there and shoot me a DM on the Pin Addict Slack. I'm a little bit slower to respond if it's not Instagram DMs. But Instagram is the primary way to contact me. Also, email pinsbypasquale@gmail.com. If you want to shoot me an email, ask me a question. If you have a material you're looking for, you want to find out about lead times, stuff like that. Instagram is the primary way to contact me, but Instagram, Pins by Pasquale, website, pinsbypasquale.com. That's about it.
Oh, that's great. Thanks again, Nick, for taking some time to talk today. I think this was a great conversation about, your journey into the pins, and how you started by learning from others, and now you're carrying that forward by hosting events so other people can learn. That's great that you're paying
Sure.
it. Not every hobby has that kind of open, inviting aspect to it that the makers seem to have. So that's definitely really cool. So once again, thanks for today. And if you were listening to this on audio only, check it out on YouTube because Nick was holding up throughout the recording some of the pins he had and some of the materials, so you can see that. And we also popped up his website, so you can see that on the YouTube. Audio only, I think you're still going to have a great time with the conversation, but it's always great for the visuals as well. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.